So the brainstorming continues. We wish all sunny and windy days to Germany, but Germany is not the only European country that is rethinking its energy production policies. I guess anyone who has traveled in Denmark has taken notice of those beautiful windmills in the landscape, and I'm pleased to give floor now to Susanne Krawack, who is a chief consultant at the think tank Concito in Copenhagen. She has a wide experience in working with problems that with sustainable growth or development and environment, and today she's presenting us the energy policy transition in Denmark. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you for inviting me to come here and explain what we're doing in Denmark. The story is to some extent a bit the same as in Germany, so I will skip the parts that are too much the same, but of course there are some differences as well. Just first brief introduction to Concito. We are a politically independent think tank, and we're working only with climate, both mitigation and adaptation policies. So we provide analysis and try to influence the political level, governments, and try to push them in the direction of a CO2 neutral Denmark. First, I will show you a few slides on the development in Denmark so far, because we have a new a new agreement. We don't call it things as fine as an Energiewende. We just call it an agreement because it's just an ongoing thing in Denmark. This is I will excuse for a few Danish words on the slides, but it would be really complicated to change them. But the light blue is oil, and you probably can understand that the yellow is natural gas, and the gray is coal, and the green is renewables. So you can see that the renewables the share of renewables has grown, and the share of coal has been reduced during the last decades. The situation in Denmark was that we had a Labour government in the 90s, then we changed to a liberal conservative government, and now we're back again to a Labour government, and you can see that in our industrial or in our energy policies. Of course, there was some spillover because especially the mill parks that were decided in the first Labour government were only implemented later on, so that's why you see this picture. If we look at the CO2 emissions, they have been reduced in most sectors, also due to, of course, the energy mix. Only the transport sector is probably in all countries. The blue one, the bottom blue, is the transport sector, and it's only the economic crisis from 2007 that has been able to reduce the CO2 emission from cars. Well, of course, there has been an impact also on the EU regulation of the CO2 emission from cars. But in most of the other sectors in Denmark has reduced its CO2 emission over the years. You can see it maybe a little bit closer here. We have the transport sector, which is the second one. I can't point here. But that's really increasing since 1980, whereas most of the other sectors are more or less stable or maybe decreasing their CO2 emission or energy consumption a little bit. So this is the story that we want to tell in Denmark, the Danish decoupling. So the top yellow is the GDP, the economic development. Then we have the blue one in the middle, which is the energy consumption, and the green one is the energy consumption per GDP. So we have actually had economic growth and reduced energy consumption at the same time for a long period. And this is a very happy story. However, then the climate think tank come into place and say that it might not be the full picture. The red line is the official data, which is going down on the CO2 emission. Now we're not counting only the energy sector, but we count the CO2 emission related to the Danish consumption, to all the Danes, the footprint of a Danish person. And then you see what happens is that if you look at actually what we're consuming from energy, both direct energy, what we're eating, the clothes we wear, the transport we do, our CO2 emission is actually growing. And what's actually happening is that we export our CO2 emissions to China, to other countries who are now producing all the goods that we consume in Denmark, and that's probably applies for most OECD countries. We just have to remember it when we talk about our decoupling. It's not such a good story as we sometimes tell it. If we look at the CO2 footprint, if we start from the top, and say the blue one, the nearly 5,000 tons, or 500,000 kilos it must be, is what we call, it's just things that we buy. It's our clothes, it's our computers, it's whatever, cups and pans for our kitchen. Then we have the brown one, 789, it's service and communication. The green one is our flights. The purple one is what we eat and drink. This is very huge impact on our CO2 emission. Then we come to the light blue, which is the direct energy consumption, like oil for the burner, petrol for the car. And then the brownish one at the top is the electricity and heat. So it's like secondary energy consumption. And I think it's only to bring it to the top of your mind that we're only talking about a very small proportion of our CO2 emission when we talk about the energy sector, and even electricity sector is even less. So our lifestyle, how much we fly, is very important to the CO2 footprint. So if I should give a brief status on the situation so far in Denmark, of course we have reduced our energy consumption and the share of renewables has increased. It's only mainly in the energy sector, and that's because it's a very top-down approach, and it still is, and as I'll come back to the new initiatives in Denmark, sectors like transport, agriculture, we're not really interfering there. And then we do have some export of CO2 to China and the eastern part of the world. So in 2012, this new agreement was made in government, and as was mentioned in the introduction by Mikko, we need both continuity and consensus if we want to change the energy policy, and that, I think that's more or less happening in Denmark. All parties except for one is behind this agreement on a really long-term energy strategy for Denmark. So the top line says what do we expect for energy consumption if nothing is done? Then we will have a huge reduction of energy consumption by efficiency and electrification, and then we will have the transition from today in 2010, coal, natural gas, oil, and renewables to actually only renewables in 2050. So I think we beat Germany there. Let's see if we do. But at least on goals. The targets is 100% renewables energy in 2050. And we will already in 2035 have 100% renewables in the electricity sector. We will have coal phased out totally in 30. No more oil-fired boilers in 30 also. And half of the electricity consumption by wind already in 2020. So these are ambitious targets. The way to do so is to focus on electrification, on efficient energy efficiency, renewable energies, and research and development demonstration. We know that we have to hand in hand with the transition, we have to learn, we have to research, and that's also because with the green transition is of course also a matter of having something to live from in 10 and 20 years' time, when most of our industrial jobs will be moved to other parts of the world. The transition, you can also, well, it can be painted in many ways. This is one of them, and it's more or less the same story. When we get to 2050, it's a little bit greenish blurred because we don't know really what is the energy mix that we'll have, but a lot of wind, that's for sure, but also quite a lot of biomass. And I'll come back to how CO2 efficient, how the CO2 emissions on that is probably not so CO2 neutral as it is being regarded today. But still, the phase out of oil and coal is a clear target. When we look at the electricity production, wind will grow to a very large proportion already, well, around 50% in 2020 and even more in 2030. We will then have other renewables, which is very much like straw. It's also it's all kind of biomass, but straw is an important thing in an agricultural country as Denmark, and we will still have a little bit of natural gas. Of course, we need some base production. One of the initiatives in the agreement is that we will not accept more oil-fired boilers, that individual house has an oil-fired boiler. From 2050, it will be prohibited to have one in a newly built house, or that's already from 2030. And from 15, you can no longer change the one you have, and you have to go for other sources of energy if your oil-fired boiler is not working any longer. So by 2030, we expect there to be no more even in the countryside. And in the same way, we will phase out coal for electricity and heat. So at the moment, I think it's like 30%. So it will be quite a fast outphasing of coal from energy production in Denmark. So how do we do this? Well, of course, the energy efficiency makes it easier to make the transformation because there will be less energy consumed, and I think that's really an important part of the game. That the transition is easier when we don't need so much energy as we do today. So, and that will be done by a heavy obligation on energy companies or the energy providers. They have to reduce their CO2 emission year by year, and they do that by entering into agreement with companies, with private consumers, and say, we can pay for your refurbishment of your house, or we can share your payment, or we can do the investment if we can buy the CO2 reduction. So that's how we make a kind of a market for CO2 reductions. And the energy companies simply have to reduce the CO2 emissions, so they can do it by either do it in their own companies or by buying it from other companies or private houses. Then we are working on building renovation. We had expected to go faster in this field, but I think the need for creating new jobs has changed a little bit the agenda for government. But still, there's a huge potential to refurbish or renovate the buildings, and there's a lot of industries that want to do it in Denmark also. So I think that'll go sooner or later. There will be an energy efficiency in that sector. The renewables, I mean, wind is by far the most important, and we got so much of it in Denmark. So it's only to put all the windmills. We tend to build them bigger and bigger, build them at sea, because not very many Danes want them as neighbors any longer. So we do have some some discussions with people that they're noisy and they're not very nice to look at, and these kind of things. We also have biomass. We import, actually, as a matter of fact, a lot of biomass at the moment, and we will import even more. And then we do produce a lot of pork meat in Denmark and pigs. So we have millions of them, and that means that we have a lot of slurry and organic waste that we can use for biogas. I think it has been exaggerated a little bit, and I'll come back to that, how much we can actually produce. But and then on the electrification, industry and heating and transport should be electrified, and then we will have this supported by the Nordic electricity market and smart grid, and I will also come a little bit back to that. But these are more or less the type of initiatives that will be used to fulfill the targets that I mentioned before. This plan, the agreement, provides about 34% of reduction in 2020 compared to 90, and the target is on 40%. So there's still a little bit lacking, 6%. And the plan is from government that they will late this year introduce a new plan for how to also involve agriculture and transport in CO2 reductions. So they should provide for the 6% up to 2020. I mean, it doesn't sound very difficult when 34% is already taken, but I think it will be a bit of a fight. The thing is that probably like in your country as well, the Ministry of Energy, they can more or less control the energy market. But once they go into other ministries, it's a lot more difficult. I mean, going to the Minister of Transport and say that you're not supposed to build more motorways, or you're not supposed to increase the transport or mobility, it's not so easy. But let's see what the plan will. We haven't seen the plan yet. It should have come actually in the end of 2012, but we haven't seen anything of it yet, so we are looking forward. The financing of the transition is exactly the same as the PSO, public service obligation. It's the same as in Germany, the EEG, you called it. EEG. I was like E in the end. Okay, but that's the same idea, that the consumers pay more than the cost of providing the energy, and the surplus goes for renewable energies. So it's more or less the same. I don't think we punish the companies as much as you do, but also have the rebate for those companies using most electricity. They get some rebate on their taxation. But then the agreement also introduced one new tax, which is called the supply security tax. The point is that, I mean, energy is heavily taxed in Denmark. It's really, we pay high prices, and we're used to it. We've done it since the 80s. But when we reduce our energy consumption, the state get less and less revenue, and that's a problem. So they have to find a new type of tax that we also pay for the renewable energy. So this is the tax of having this security of getting energy. I don't know, you could call it whatever. I mean, the consumer pays somehow. And we just call the taxes different things, but this is the newest version. But of course, and that means, of course, that the price of electricity and heating goes up. But what we heard from Germany, that this is a huge issue, it isn't in Denmark. I mean, hardly anybody knows probably what they pay for energy. So they know exactly what they pay for petrol, but not for electricity. People would ask, what do I pay? What is it? They don't know. So it's not really a political issue. It's an issue for industries, and industries do they do discuss it, and actually just recently their taxation was reduced in order to create more jobs. I don't know if it works. I mean, in my mind, if we put more taxation on industry, they would have an incentive to reduce their energy consumption, and that should be fine. So I don't really see that point. So what we do is actually that we support the kind of industries that use more energy, so the smarter ones have to pay. So I don't really get that. Then we have the North Sea oil, and that's of course a huge, from a financial side, it's very important for Denmark, and we try to get more revenue out of that. So we try to squeeze a bit more taxation out of the companies that are actually taking the oil out of the North Sea. I was mentioning that biomass is probably not as CO2 neutral as it is expected to be. If we look at Kyoto Protocol and the EU, they consider it biomass CO2 neutral and say that you can count it for zero when you make your CO2 emission calculations. but when we look at it, you have a time. It actually has a CO2 emission. I mean, of course, a tree that grows will take in the CO2 that will be then emitted when it's burned. But there's a 100 years time difference, and that means that we get the emission now and not in 100 years time, and that means very much for the CO2 emission and for the climate change. So and then if we start producing a lot of wood or other crops for energy production, we will then use land that shouldn't be non-arable land for the time being, and very often that will emit a larger proportion of CO2, what we call the land use change. And if you include that in the biomass CO2 emission, it actually means that it's better than coal, but it's not that much more better. So there's a thing there that I think that the Danish transition is very much based on shifting to biomass, and we don't see it as CO2 neutral. So that is, and then the next question is how much does exist of it? I mean, biogas was in the Danish debate raised as, ooh, that will help us. Then we don't have to use natural gas, we can just use the biogas. The point is that we have to have some organic material to put into the slurry from the agricultural sites, and there's a limitation to that. And I think it turns out every time we look at the CO2 neutral biomass, that there isn't so much of it. So it's, of course we should use it, of course we should exploit it and use the energy, but it doesn't really solve our problem. Well, cost. I couldn't really figure out, because Denmark is such a much smaller country than Germany. I think we're around 6% or something. But our investment up to 2020 is 750 million euro, and that's very much in windmills and windmill parks. And that will, of course, lead to increase for families and for companies also. I think I will skip this one because it's more or less the same as what happens in Germany of how we finance the transition. This is showing how the increase per household will be, and it is expected to be such a slow increase that people will hardly feel it. So they dare to make this on their website from the Ministry of Climate and Energy. Then I would talk just briefly about the wind, Danish wind energy. We already started this transition, as you can see, in the 80s, and in the 90s there was the increase in wind capacity was very, very high. In the beginning, we had the green ones are windmills on land, and the blue one is at sea, and we will continue more at sea because that's windmills get bigger and bigger and get more and more difficult to place at land. So we put them at sea. It's more expensive. So what we do right now is that we try to put them not as far at sea, but rather close to the coast. It's a lot cheaper to build them, and still it's away from people's houses. So already now we are around 20% of our electricity consumption is based on wind. And what we do with more and more wind in the system is that we will, of course, import and export. We have links to Norway, to Sweden in 2 places, both from Jutland and from Zealand, and we have 2 connections to Germany also. And this is actually a snapshot where you can see where import and export, you can probably understand these words, but we at the website of our overall national energy company, which is called EnergyNet, you can from time to time see how much do we import, how much do we export. And that is of course based on the market. Sometimes we can earn money selling energy to Germany that we bought cheaper from Norway. And that seems to be quite a good business for Denmark. But we have the grid already, so this is just working. I mean, selling and buying, and I think Denmark is one of the countries in Europe that has the most import and export of energy all the time. We have a similar grid on gas. We also have a link to both Norway, Sweden, and Germany. So we also, when it comes to gas, can buy and sell from where the prices are high and low. And with Norway and Sweden, we have a joint market, so we have one price that which is going up and down all the time. But this is actually a national company that is selling and buying the last hour before now, so that we assure that there are electricity in the system and that we get it at the best price. And then, of course, at the longer run, we will get more and more difficulties in the balance, because when the wind blows, we have a lot of wind and a lot of electricity, and when there's no wind, it's a bit more difficult. So we see electric cars as one of the options for actually having a storage of electricity. So you can load the batteries when the wind is on, and when the wind is blowing, then electricity will be very cheap. So it's cheap to load your battery, and then you can drive whenever you want. So you can maybe even have 2 batteries for your car. And we of course are very much. We have to have a strategy for smart grids, because this balance and steering of the electricity production and consumption will be extremely important in the future. So I think the Danish situation is like we also heard from Germany, that there's a lot of economic partners saying that this is too expensive and this is too difficult and why should we do it, and others see it as an opportunity for defining a new market and creating new jobs. What we have seen so far is that our export of energy technologies is going up. The orange one is the total export, and the green one is the share of the total export in Denmark. It's not that much. It's less than 10%, but it's come up from and it's still increasing. So what we see actually is that our wind adventure that started already in the 90s has actually created quite a number of companies and quite some growth in the companies in Denmark. And we of course hope that will continue with the energy policy as we have it. And you can see here that it's Denmark has a higher growth in export of energy technologies than the other countries in EU. So summing up, we are on the path, I think, of a transition. We have a very ambitious plan for a CO2 neutral Denmark in 2050, and we will reach it by efficiency and more renewable energies, and mainly wind. It's all financed by the consumers. There's nobody else to do it. But actually, if we look at the windmill parks, a lot of our pension companies, which are very rich, they invest in windmills because it's a long-term, very safe investment. So it's actually not difficult to get the investments in the windmill parks in Denmark. We see that it do create new markets, and from Concito at least, we say that the biomass is probably not the right way, so maybe there should be some adjustments to this course. And we feel little by little it's running into government as well. It's taking some time. But we also see that government is a little less ambitious as it is now because of the economic crisis. So, but still, I mean, nobody is really saying that we shouldn't follow this energy policy. So, thank you. That was my words.
Thanks a lot. It seems to be a general rule that in the end the consumer pays. But after all these fine introductions and presentations, I think it's time to shift to the debate, and we have one more person to join us for the debate, and I think Henrik Haapajärvi, who is a senior advisor of a trade union Pro, has promised to give first some comment, and then I hope all the panelists come here to the tables, and we proceed directly to the panel debate. The panel will be moderated by Dr. Hanna-Liisa Kangas, who works for World Wide Fund for Nature and is a specialist on these issues. So I first give the floor to Henrik, and then directly we continue to the panel. And then if you still have questions, you can make them directly in some part of a panel, or there's somebody emptying the box there. If there are any, we take them into the panel. But first, Henrik.